We're Latino men, we knowing that this was giving us a quick snapshot, but it didn't represent the stories of everyone. Like I mentioned yesterday, we tend to isolate the way that we think about our students, right? We say Latino men, and I think we jump to our quickest reference point, you know, whatever Latino male looks like. But we know that the Latino male population is so complex. It's so, there's just varied identities within that. So when I was doing this, when I started here, so I don't know if everyone knows, but I did my doctoral degree here at San Diego State, and then afterwards I got hired here full-time, the faculty. And so Luke and Frank were actually my advisors. So now it's really nice to be able to work with them as my colleagues. And in that time, you know, I know that Luke was, this was part of his research agenda, and I think he kind of started initiating my interest as well in this research. And at the time, you know, I'm writing my chapter 2. Everyone hates chapter 2, that's your lit review. And he's like, okay, I want you to go out there and I want you to find all the literature you can find on Latino men in community colleges. And I was like, all right, I got this. And so I'm going, I'm searching, and I don't find anything. And I was like, I must be a terrible researcher. And I came back to Luke, I was like, I can't find anything. And he's like, Matt, come on, there's gotta be something. I was like, okay, you search, because I can't find it. And so he's searching, and he's like, you're right, there's nothing. So he even reached out to Boots and Victor Science, who are very well known for their scholarship on Latino men. And he asked them, like, hey, have you all published anything on Latino men in community colleges? And I think we were both surprised when they said no, that most of their research was focused on the K-12 pipeline or students at four-year universities. And so I was like, what am I going to do? I don't have a lit review. I can't do my dissertation. There's nothing research to look at. And so Luke, I had taken his quantitative class. So one of a requirement that Luke has for students taking his quant class is that you must write a paper. You have to draft a manuscript for publication, and you submit it for publication. And and he's like, you know what, there's nothing out there. Use this as your opportunity to submit a paper and be the first person to publish something on Latino men in community colleges. So I was like, all right, just pull some data. And I mean, at the time, I was like, I knew the impact of what that meant, but it wasn't until later when I realized, and I kind of started organizing the literature. At that time, Luke and Frank have been very active in doing research on Black men in community colleges. And so when it came down, I defended my dissertation in 2011. When I was doing my lit review, my oral defense, I shared this slide with them. I said, okay, this is what we know about Latino men in community colleges. Between 2012 and 2013, I think at that point. No, well, I added these earlier. Actually, so there was only really one article on here when I defended, and the others came afterwards. And of course, you know, the literature on African American men was much more robust. And so, so I think I even found it difficult to even sit there and make. I felt like I couldn't make recommendations for research or for practice specifically. I was like, what am I supposed to tell practitioners to do to better support Latino men when we don't really know anything about them? Like, we haven't explored what their experiences are like, you know, within our scholarship. And so over the time, I think now, we've been kind of advocating and working with our students to produce more research and literature. But even then, this is what the literature looks like now. So there's still not very much out there what we know about Latino men in community colleges in scholarship, in terms of publications and research. And you see that this side, it goes off the page, that's on purpose, because there's continued to be, you know, a lot of, you know, great research on, you know, supporting Black men. And I also wanted to mention that this literature here highlights literature that's specific to Latino men. I know out of M2C3 we do a lot of publication and work on men of color in general, where we do research on, you know, kind of coupling everybody together. But when we look at specifically the work on Latino males, it's still very much limited. So what are all these? What do we know? So here's just kind of a snapshot of the literature on Latino men in the community college and what we know. So for the most part, the research that has been conducted has been primarily quantitative. are actually qualitative, and those are by Victor Science and his team of researchers from UT Austin. And so, and all of the other studies, most of the other studies are out of here, out of 2C3. So, but I think in general what we see, so we see that the literature focuses on engagement, right, and what we know about engagement. I think it's similar to what we know about men of color in general about engagement. We know that Latino men who work more hours during the week are less likely to engage with their faculty and peers on their campus because they're away from campus. Mexicano men with positive perceptions of help seeking are more likely to engage with faculty. These are things I think we know that are important, and I think we see it in our day-to-day basis, but of course when someone puts it in some data and it's all of a sudden everybody believes you now. And it's like, oh wow, yes, you're right, it's important. Healthy competitive ethos increases faculty-student engagement, and so I think this came from our research on considering like just different identities of masculinity, masculine identities, and so, you know, there's been, I think, frameworks that say that men of color tend to struggle with asking for help or for, you know, having this competitive ethos where it could be supportive, but it could also be detrimental to them because they feel like they push themselves too much and they don't, they extend themselves and eventually kind of burn out and don't do well. In terms of non-cognitive factors, we know that life stressors, as Luke was saying earlier, the lower levels of stress, the higher levels of degree utility and locus of control. So the more likely that students are to feel that their degree is worthwhile, that there's a reason for them to be there, and that they feel that they are in control of their own education. We also looked at, you know, different levels of, perceptions of, higher levels of degree utility, locus of control, and intrinsic interest. So the more that a student felt that, you know, the degree was worthwhile, the more that they felt that they were in control of their education, and the more that they had just this intrinsic interest in wanting to learn and to be there, the more positive the perceptions of schools of feminine domain. So the other thing I want to mention is that most of the literature, not all of it, the theoretical frameworks that guide this research, it's usually the literature on, the framework, the SEO model that Luke and Frank developed, but it's also based on another framework by O'Neill. It's called male gender role conflict. And, you know, as like most of our, most of what we know theoretically in, you know, theoretical frameworks, they were typically developed with one particular set of population or groups in mind. So usually students, white male or white students at predominantly white institutions. And so I think this framework itself, I think it's a great framework, but at the same time I also feel that it's also very challenging because it doesn't take into consideration the various cultural and I think gendered perspectives or nuances that are unique to men of color in general and then also to Latino males. And so I think even the way that we conduct this research is still very limited in our understanding of how do we contextualize the experiences of Latino men. And so as I mentioned, you know, Science and his colleagues have taken a qualitative approach to their research and to examine and to look at masculinity. So what role does masculinity play in the way that Latino men perceive their education or the way that they consider whether they're going to persist or not? And so their research has found that machismo prevents students from asking for help because they see asking for help as being soft or feminine, or they've got this pride of not wanting to look like they can't do it on their own because they grew up in a household, maybe a single parent household, being the only man in the house to have to support their family, or maybe growing up with a father figure who kind of ingrained in them this sense of, you know, being strong and you know, never letting your guard down and never letting other people know your weaknesses because they'll judge you for that. And then the others, I think we tend to hear a lot about machismo, right? And I think these scholars here, they focus on, you know, when we study or we think about machismo, it could be it's typically seen in a very negative light, right? So when we think about macho or machismo, we immediately tend to think like, oh, that, you know, that Latino male, he's, I don't know, it's usually like a negative connotation about that person. And so they kind of looked at, you know, what's the flip side? You know, what's the positive aspect of these